Good morning. It's Thursday morning. Garland Nixon here with Scott Ritter, and NATO is in a panic, and the State of the Union is failed, according to Margaret Kimberly. Let's talk. Good morning, all. Just want to make sure everybody checks in the show notes. I have a link to my latest article. Apparently, Scott Ritter is the most popular man on YouTube. Every video that Scott makes, Doug McGregor makes, we've got these appears maybe it's Vietnamese, I don't know, but there's a bunch of websites that just steal every video and put them up, and that's the big thing. So I got an article on there. Make sure you spread it around. When you start seeing these videos popped up that are stolen content from people like me and Stephen Gardner and Daniel Davis and Danny Haifong and anybody else who happens to be fortunate enough to get Scott, Doug McGregor, and these guys on. When you see these videos, please report them as copyright violations. Report them to YouTube, because YouTube doesn't seem to be real thrilled about acting on it. All right, Scott, let's start here. NATO's in a panic. And Emmanuel Macron has been saying for a while that NATO is brain dead. I think the fact that they're in panic shows that maybe they're not brain dead. They got every reason to be in a panic. Let's start by talking about the state of affairs on the battlefield, on the contact lines, that as much as you know about it. Scott Ritter.
What we see is that Russia is relentlessly maintaining the pressure all along the front. People who are expecting dramatic results don't understand, I guess, the thinking behind the Russian approach. The Russian approach continues to be, based upon the notion of attritional warfare. That is, their job is to grind down the Ukrainians as much as possible and continue. And the best way to do that is either sit and let the Ukrainians attack, which the Ukrainians for a while were prone to do, or when the Ukrainians have punched themselves out, to begin a slow, relentless advance, taking one village, one tree line at a time, and in the process killing, capturing, wounding or rendering harmless the Ukrainians that are there. Attrition warfare. The Russians aren't in the business of overreaching. Anybody who studies war, studies the history of war, for instance, the great maneuver battles of 1943, 42, 43, between von Manstein and the Soviets, you'll see on any number of occasions the Soviets tried to accomplish too much. Popov's first tank army bursting through in Kharkov, getting cut off and annihilated, the counterattacks, etc. Russia's not in the business of allowing that kind of history to be written at this juncture. It's a very controlled operation, and they're having success. They are after the Battle of Avdiivka, they that was sort of the linchpin of the Ukrainian series of fortifications that had been hardened in Donetsk, the Oblast or People's Republic of Donetsk. Now that it's been broken, the Russians have pushed forward towards Orlovka, and in doing so, they've punctured that line, which means that they have freedom to go left and right and roll up, which they're starting to do to the north and to the south. The Ukrainians, to prevent this, are pouring in their last organized reserves. They're throwing them in counterattacks in Orlovka right now, and also at Robotyno, another place in Zaporizhia where the Russians have been pushing forward. And this is where we're seeing M1 Abrams tanks now. I think 4 have been destroyed out of 31. Multiple Bradleys. These are, the 47th Mechanized Brigade. These are the best Ukrainian reserves. They're being thrown into battle, and the Russians are more than happy to destroy them. And this is one of the reasons why NATO's in a panic, because NATO understands what's about to happen. What's about to happen is what you and I have been talking about, that we're getting to that point of collapse. When the reserves run out, when you have no counterattacking force, when your defenses are depleted and are so thin that the Russians advance, when you don't have backup defenses, you're going to have to do something very dramatic if you're Ukraine to preserve any combat cohesion. And that will probably be a very precipitous withdrawal behind the Dnieper River. And you see, for instance, William Burns, the director of the CIA, warning people. He said the Russians are on the cusp of making very dramatic advances. Ukraine's ready to lose a whole bunch of territory, because when you run out of troops, you can't defend on a front. You're going to have to pull back and use geographical features like rivers. And the biggest geographical feature, the river that Ukraine can fall back on right now, is the Dnieper River. This is about to happen. And when it happens, the problem with calamitous retreats is they aren't controllable events. There's people that play war games, guilty in the past. You got the map out there and you got your little cardboard pieces, and it's all nice because you move the piece. You look at your movement rate, you move the piece, and it moves. Sometimes they make you roll the dice. Depending on morale, will they obey the order? Roll the dice. Boom. Okay, but it's still, the board game makes it look more controlled than reality is. Reality, though, is what happened to the French army after they started retreating from Moscow after the Battle of Smolensk. They just collapsed. Total retreat, no organization, no cohesion, Cossacks running amongst you, spearing you, guys running off, freezing to death, and the disintegration of the French army. The Ukrainian military could very well be approaching that state. This is why Emmanuel Macron is saying we have to do something. We have to send forces into Ukraine to create a line of resistance in Odessa, because he knows what's about to happen. They all know what's about to happen. The retreat, the collapse, and then there ain't nothing to stop the Russians from pushing through Odessa, through the Trans-Syrian border, etc., because there's no Ukrainian army left. Now, is there a chance that the Ukrainians will pull this off magnificently? You never know. They might be able to, come pull back, preserve as much combat power as possible, fall back behind the Dnieper River, fall into prepared defensive positions. And the Russians, because they're not in the business of rapid advance right now, would not be able to exploit that, maintain, and so it would be a slower, more controlled advance. That's a possibility. But Burns doesn't believe that's going to happen. Macron doesn't believe that's going to happen. NATO doesn't believe that's going to happen, because they have their finger on the pulse. They're in contact with these guys on a daily basis. They're in the operations centers. They're the ones providing the intelligence, the advice, and they are getting the feedback. And the feedback is bleak, bleak, bleak. So I think that what we're seeing on the battlefield. Everybody's I just love people who are just like, you said they're going to collapse last month. The collapse is a process. The process is occurring. When exactly, you finally get the cohesion to break, when the last tensile strength collapses and it just implodes. I can't predict that. You can't predict that. Nobody can predict that. A lot of it depends on human spirit. The courage of the Ukrainian soldier to dig in for one more day. Hold on to that position one more time. So that's, if you look at the Battle of Stalingrad, the Battle of Pavlov's house, that held up, a handful of Russian soldiers in this fortified position holding up the German advance. They held out for, I forget, 58 days. It was a long time. But the point is, we don't know what the Ukrainians are going to do, if they're going to be a call upon this, or if the opposite, men who should be able to stand up and fight suddenly just lose it and run. Because they've lost the will to fight, even though physically they're able to fight. We can't predict it. War is an awful lot about the human spirit. But the fact that we're talking about the human spirit means that we're at desperate, because normally war isn't about that. War is about systems, about processes, about organizations. And and it's the machine. Everybody been in the military knows the big green machine's going to give it to you, baby. You're in it. You're going to get it. But now we're at the point for the Ukrainians that we're down to talking about the tenacity of the individual. And if you're talking about the tenacity of the individual, you're in the Alamo moment, and we know how the Alamo finished. Yeah, Davy Crockett on the wall plugging Mexicans as they come out, but he's going to die. Travis up there trying to get the cannon going, he's going to die. You may elongate the process through individual heroism or group heroics, but if we're down to heroism as being what's going to save the day, it's over. And that's where we're at right now. We're down to the point where the Ukrainians are relying upon heroism to save the day, and the bullets beat heroism every single time. Everybody will tell you that if you're in a foxhole next to a hero, get the hell out because it's not going to end well.
Well, one of the things is Macron has said, well, we may have some red lines, Kiev and Odessa. And I'm like, here's the way I feel. I always like to use Mike Tyson because, I've taken to Mike Tyson's like in his 50s. And I've watched some of these YouTube shows. And he's still a monster. You know what I mean? I'm looking at him. He's ripped. He's huge. And, boxing. And you see like the guy swing and quicker than a blink of an eye, he's over here. He's ducked the punch, whack, 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 and thrown a combination in a second. And I'm like, man, I'd be flying, I'd be airborne immediately, right? So I could say to Mike Tyson, I got red lines, Mike. If you do X, that's it, dude. I can have all the red lines that I want. When he swings, I'm going to be airborne. Simple as that. And I probably won't be alive when I hit the ground, right? So we've got Macron giving the Russian military, the big red army, red lines. And let me read something that was in that I think is very, very enlightening. And this is in Moon of Alabama. The French magazine Marianne got access to several confidential defense reports from the French army on the situation in Ukraine. The French magazine Marianne got access to. Somebody gave them. Somebody said here. And they were confidential defense reports, right? That said things like, the situation looks exceedingly bleak for Ukraine, right? So the bottom line is this: somebody, while Macron's running around giving red lines to the French army, somebody in the French military is going to the press saying, here, you might want to read this. This guy's trying to pull us into a suicide mission. Your thoughts on Macron and the idea that he could say to his military, all right, guys, we're going to send, 50,000 troops with a half dozen tanks, and we really don't have any air cover. We don't really have any air defense whatsoever, but there's 400,000 Russians in that area. Take them out.
Yeah. I'm giving away an article that I'm writing right now. I don't know if the article is going to get published because I'm waiting for Macron to speak. I'd hate to publish an article about the futility of French military involvement when Macron comes out and says it's futile, we can't do it. But the fact is, France doesn't have the forces capable of intervening in Ukraine. Let's just be straight up. It's a small. I know people go, there's 300,000 of them. No, there's not. There's about 12,000 that can be deployed. And right now in Romania, because they would be going through Romania, maybe a base in Moldova if they establish Moldova. I'll get to that in a second. I've spent the whole week researching this topic to the T. First of all, how do you get them there? France in 2023 did an exercise in January 2023. It was a logistics exercise. It was the largest exercise France ever did before, and they were learning how to do things as opposed to being very proficient in it, meaning that they had never done it before. We're talking about moving 12,000 men. And they went through the process, and so it's very rudimentary. So now they did that. It took them 2 years to prepare for that exercise. They started planning in 2021 to do the training exercise in 2023. So that tells you that now, if they're going to try to move to Romania, they don't have the expertise. That's going to be a problem in terms of the power projection right off the bat, just logistically getting them there. But let's say they do that, they accomplish that. They have 700 troops right now in Romania, part of Task Force Eagle. This is a reinforced battalion, and it's based around a single armor company. That's 13 tanks, ladies and gentlemen. 13 tanks. That's the tip of the spear for the French. Now they've put forward. I interact with this guy Jeff Fisher. He's a former U.S. Army colonel. He likes to call himself I think it was a command level colonel. I always love that term, command level. Command level. But did you command? No. But it's command level. That means he was on the staff. But he's a foreign area officer at all this stuff. And so he was talking about, the vast French air power. France has 4 Rafale fighters deployed right now to Romania. That tends to be the limit of their projection. They have 4 more fighters deployed into Estonia or in Lithuania, providing that. But France is in the business of deploying expeditionary air wings. That's what America does. France doesn't do that. They don't know how to do it. They can't sustain it. So they punch 4 fighters into Romania. Now, you have the fighters there. The purpose of the 4 is to provide some sort of air cover for the French forces that are there to prevent the Russians from attacking them. 4 fighters. Now, they're reinforced with F-16s and others from other NATO because it's a combined effort, but 4 is the French effort. To protect them, they deployed both Crotale and Mamba surface-to-air missiles. France has 4, I believe, battalion-sized air defense entities, and they have gone through the very difficult process of locating them in expeditionary fashion in Romania, setting them up, and they're there today, providing limited structure. Now, these are decent weapon systems, but for people to think that they're the solver, the Mamba, the Russians are going to fight. France and Italy have already provided the Mamba to Ukraine, and it's been destroyed. They've already provided the Crotale to Ukraine, and it's been destroyed. So it's not a magic weapon. People need to understand that. And the French don't have that many of them. The French aren't in the business of large-scale ground combat. They're just not in that business. They're not equipped for it. They don't have the training. They're talking about increasing this battalion to a brigade size in 2025. And so the 13 tanks, I think, would increase the numbers to, they'd add another 35. So you're just short of 50 tanks would be what they could. And the reason why I want to bring up the brigade is if France is going to intervene in Ukraine, it would be with a single brigade. That's all they got. And they're planning for it right now. So what Macron could do is accelerate the process of pushing these troops forward into Romania. And then you'd have to move them into Ukraine. We're talking about a brigade. Logistically, how do you do this? You need heavy equipment. We're getting into the basics here, guys. You need the trucks to move the tanks. Do they have enough trucks available to do that? And the answer is maybe. Fuel. How do you get the fuel to sustain this force from Romania into Ukraine? Well, France has been working with the Ukrainians about logistics provisions for the Ukrainian forces. So they have fuel depots, etc. So in theory, France could fall in on that. But now this is an additional demand that France needs to have unique access to. They don't want to be part of the shared logistics burden of Ukraine, which means they have to set up their own logistics footprint, which will be targeted. And the more dispersed you make it, because you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, is the more intensive the manpower requirement, the more intensive the security footprint necessary to protect them. France would need to put air power in Ukraine because you can't operate out of Romanian airfields. There's a single airfield, Ivano-Frankivsk, that's located across the border near Odessa or near that border, where right now NATO is talking about deploying F-16s. And so they've already done the planning on how to get Western aircraft, maintenance, etc., into Ivano-Frankivsk. So France could dovetail on that, put French airplanes up over that, and dare the Russians through the red line theory to attack. Then they could also forward deploy the Mamba and the Crotale to provide, again, the force protection of that airfield. That's one thing France could do. And the question is, would Russia therefore not attack the airfield? If it was a French-only deployment, only providing air cover over that airfield, maybe Russia would say it's not worth it to go to war with NATO. but that airfield is going to be used for F-16s. So you know Russia's taking it off the face of the map, and any French forces that are going to be taken off the face of the map too. So there goes the French air cover. The air defense we know won't last. The brigade goes forward. It's not a NATO brigade right now. France has a political problem. All the forces that they're talking that could deploy in are earmarked to NATO. They would have to be taken out of NATO and become a French only thing. And that's not easy to do. France has commitments. You know, they are the lead battalion for, you know, the Eagle task force. And so you're stripping capability away from NATO to send it into Ukraine. And I could go on all day long about this. I've looked into this, like I said, down to the last bullet and last bayonet. The best France could do is, in a period of several months, because it isn't going to happen instantaneously, is to project a single brigade that has the capacity of having battalion-sized elements from, say, the Baltics, because they've made noise about this, joining up, but getting the Baltics organized for expeditionary deployment and working with the French, that could complicate things. But you could get a reinforced brigade sent into Ukraine, supported by a small air component and a small air defense component and a medium-sized logistic component. The total deployment of these troops would number around 10,000, and they would be dead in days. They have no ability to wage modern war. There's no survivability factor. There's nothing. Because keep in mind, they're going in not to reinforce an existing Ukrainian defense, but to supplement Ukraine's abilities by creating a line that frees up Ukrainian troops to go to the front line. That's the idea. The idea is to keep the French out of contact with the Russians by holding a rear area that frees up Ukrainian forces to push forward. Those Ukrainian forces won't make it to the front line. If they do, they're going to die. And then next, you know, the Russians are knocking on the French line, but there won't be a French line because Russia's going to have blown it up beforehand. And then what does NATO do when you're looking at 10,000 dead French soldiers, 50 destroyed Leclerc tanks, French prisoners of war, Latvian prisoners of war, the humiliation of NATO, destroyed Rafale fighters, and you have a whole NATO force that the French used to be part of sitting over there in Romania looking at their brothers in arms dying, because that's what will happen. Macron is I think has woken up to the fact that I anticipate that he's going to he'll still maintain some sort of, you know, all options are on the table thing. But if you notice, Scholz, the German chancellor, just called an emergency summit tomorrow where he's bringing Macron, he's bringing Tusk, I think, out of Poland, because the Poles were making stupid noises too about intervention. And I think Scholz is bringing them together saying, this ain't the route, guys, because we can't back you up. You won't have NATO backing. Germany's not going this route. And if you do it, you're on your own. Poland was hoping that America would send additional forces to Poland to strengthen them so they could be bold and move forward into Western Ukraine. America said, no, we're not going to do that, which means Poland's on their own, which means the Poles know they would die. So I think that's where we're at right now. This was, in a way, I feel sorry for Macron, because he was abandoned by the United States. You know, he was told by Victoria Nuland and others to lean forward aggressively, and he did. That France can. And now he's leaned forward and he's there, and you know he's given his word that he's going to back the Ukrainians to the hilt. A word he wouldn't have given if the United States didn't say we're there with you till the bitter end. You know, Macron never expected for him to be doing this alone or for Europe to be going alone. And yet he was abandoned by the United States, left there, and he, you know, in order to save face, started saying things, and he got ahead of the game. So ahead that, as you rightly point out, French officers loaned some documents to French publications so they can educate the French populace about what they're getting, you know, what they're about to get involved in if Macron goes forward. But I think at the end of the day, Macron, he can't do it, because there's no way you can twist this that has France doing anything that doesn't end with the utter humiliation of the French military in Ukraine at the hands of the Russians.
You know, I'll never forget. It reminds me of this is a a statement that was made that I've used many times, and this was I'll never forget when someone was saying something about we need to leave Iraq. Can we leave Iraq with our dignity, or something like that? When we were involved in, you know, the long slog and insurgencies, and people were dying, and nothing was moving for the U.S. You know, we were just there, right? And Al Sharpton, of all people, was on TV, and someone said, "Can we leave with our dignity?" He says, "No, we lost our dignity when we went in," right? And it's like, can we get out of this thing without humiliation? Mm-mm. The day we stepped into that thing, because here's the foundation. Now, let me throw this at you. You're saying that Russia is threatening NATO, France, they're heading for the English Channel. But to fight Russia, you have to go to Russia's border, because Russia ain't coming out to mess with nobody. And Russia, that whole Red Army, is geared up to protect that border. So you got to go to the border of Russia. They can fire surface-to-surface missiles out of their airspace. They have no logistics chain. They have no supply lines. They're on their border. Their country is their supply lines, right? I mean, short supply lines into Ukraine. There's a big difference between getting stuff from France to Russia's border than it is from getting to Russia's border. The bottom line I'm getting at is, for all the talk NATO, France, or anybody else is doing, to go to the border of a superpower with a history of military success like Russia, to fight them is always going to be suicide. Your thoughts?
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, there's a difference between, and the Russians know this. You know, the Russians for the longest time had a doctrine that the Soviets, in dealing with NATO, that they said, you know, we will absorb a NATO attack because Russia's, I mean, the Soviet philosophy, and it's not a flawed one. Look at, for instance, the example of Hungary in 1956, when Hungary went up in smokes. There was talk amongst NATO of, do we intervene? Okay, that's an offensive operation. Do we intervene? You know, what happens if, you know, East Germany flipped? There's a revolution. Do we intervene? What happens if Poland in 1970, 1980, the Solidarity movement goes up and Poland flips the script and becomes, you know, says they want to be with the West? Do we intervene? So the people say NATO would never intervene. I'm telling you right now, NATO always had plans to intervene. They never did, but they always had the plans to intervene. And to intervene, they would have to attack. So the Soviet philosophy was always based upon, you know, deep echelons of forces. If you attack, that first echelon receives the attack, stops the attack, and then the second echelon works its way through and counterattacks, and the third echelon goes in and kills you all. That's their philosophy. And the Russian army today is organized in a similar fashion. It's not a offensively oriented army. It's a defensively oriented army that has a counterattacking capability. That's their philosophy: to receive, to attack. So they're not structured to lead off with the. You know who is structured to lead off is a NATO. The entire NATO thing is about advance to contact, advance to contact, advance to contact. The entire Russian thing is defense, 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 counterattack. So he tells you right off the bat the whole approach is not one. Now, the counterattack, you know, is offensive, but the Russians have to. They don't lead off with that. They respond with that, and there's a transition period that accounts for that. But the initial organizational, you know, philosophy is to receive an attacking force. So Russia's not going to be attacking, you know, NATO. This is stupidity in the extreme. If NATO wants a fight with Russia, they're going to have to go look for the fight. Russia is not going to go into Poland. If there's going to be a fight with Poland, it's because Poland went into Western Ukraine. Russia's not going to invade Lithuania. If Russia is involved with Lithuania, it's because Lithuania sought to strangle Kaliningrad, sought to, you know, do something to disrupt, you know, Russian sovereignty. And then Russia will respond. It will be a reaction to an action. and so people should just take a giant chill pill. Look at the Finns right now. They're so stupid, and so are the Swedes, because there literally was no Russian military power between the Finnish border and St. Petersburg. You had border guards, you had this, that, but the Russians never ever felt threatened by Finland. They were never like, oh, the Finns are going to attack. We're worried. We're worried. They had forces up north near the Kola Peninsula because Norway's up there and NATO could come in from that direction. So they had forces up there. But along the entire Finnish border, you had border guards. That's it. That's it. But now Russia has built the St. Petersburg military district. And they're going to have 70,000 troops right there whose sole job is to kill Finns or NATO, anybody who comes in. And so all these, this Finnish talk, well, we could do this, we could do this, we could do that. No, you can't. The Russians will absorb your attack, blunt your offensive capability, and then they will come in and counterattack and they will take Helsinki. That's the reality. That's the future of NATO conflict with Russia. NATO will attack, they will be destroyed, and then Russia will counterattack, and Russia will occupy. But Berlin doesn't happen because the Russians decide we're marching to Berlin. Berlin happens because the Germans decided they wanted to help the Poles move into Western Ukraine. And then you get a Russian counterattack, and if there's no nuclear war, then Berlin will be Russian again. I mean, that's just the reality of it. But it won't be because the Russians want it to be, or the Russians are pursuing that. It'll be because Russia's reacting to the offensive, proclivities of NATO.
One of the things I've been reading lately, and to me that is aligned. And there are two issues. One is the collapse of the military, which I think is imminent. And by imminent, I don't mean hours, I mean months over the course of the summer. And again, it's at the Russians' pace. The other thing is that I don't see how you can have a military collapse and now without a political collapse. And here's what I will present. There have been numerous articles, Telegram channels talking about apparently some people in the Russian military, in the Ukrainian military who have been chatting about how they could take out Zelensky, how they could take over the government, take the Rada, blah, blah, blah. It seems to me that in light of particularly the fact that Zelensky was much more popular amongst the military than the butcher, Syrski, Zelensky clearly is not very popular. It seems to me that in alignment somewhere with this military collapse, that I don't see any way there's a military collapse. Somebody's going to get blamed by the military. They're going to be pissed by the people that a political collapse and realignment is going to happen therein. Scott.
Look, history shows this. All we have to do is go back to Tsarist Russia and what happens when a government, an unpopular government, keeps telling the military to commit suicide. The military will turn on that unpopular government. If you'd gone to General Brusilov in 1916, I sorry to bring up history, but he's a Russian general. He never would have said, "Oh, the solution is for us to withdraw back and give a lot of territory to the Germans and demilitarize." He never would have said that because in 1916 there was still cohesion. There was still the military would fight. So people are like, "Oh, the Ukrainian military would never agree to terms." Well, you do when there's collapse. You do when it comes to the point of, see, the military people, they don't believe in hope. Zelensky believes in, hope and a line of white powder or whatever. And I don't normally go that route. I've been avoiding talking about his alleged drug use. Vladimir Putin made a absolute point to bring it up, not once, but twice. And Putin's not he's not that kind of guy. So for the Russian president to put it out there, it means it's so painfully obvious, and it is so painfully obvious. Zelensky is a coked up failure of a leader, and the Ukrainian army is not going to die for him, not much longer. And so what's going to happen is that the military professionals are looking around there. A military professional is going to look at this situation and say, this is untenable. And because I'm not suicidal, and because I don't believe in what you're asking me to die for, we can't do that. In order for us to survive, because now they go into survival mode. For us to survive, we need to withdraw to this line, and we have to accept these terms. And I think you're going to see at some point in time, the military is going to, I firmly believe, take matters under their own control. And this chatter that you're seeing about driving on the Rada, on the Ukrainian parliament, of removing Zelensky, I think sooner or later it will manifest itself, because the Ukrainian people don't believe in Zelensky. The Ukrainian people don't believe in their politicians anymore. You had a fat Ukrainian politician just read it from the Rada say, back in the Middle Ages, rich people could buy their way out of going to war. And I think we should pass a law that allows fat rich people like me to buy your way out of going to war. It was called the coward's tax. At least he was honest enough to admit that he's a coward. But imagine now you're a soldier. Imagine your guy just got thumped on the head and sent out there, and you're on the front line. And now you have some fat, member of parliament saying, well, we're going to pass a law that says you can buy your way out. Well, I'm thinking I'm going to turn to my guys on my left and my right and say, why don't we show him what the price of is, and then go give him, $1.50 worth of, 5.45 rounds in the belly. That's probably the direction this is all heading. I honestly believe that when Zelensky was pushed out and Nuland came in, that the deal that was cut made Zelensky very much a figurehead and transferred a lot of, I think, sole decision-making power about the war. Look, Sersky took over. And if you remember, Zelensky got in trouble because he said that, it's a stalemate. We're on the defensive. And Zelensky's, no, we're going to counterattack. We're going to counterattack. We're going to counterattack. And Zelensky said, no, we're in a stalemate. It's a frozen conflict. And so Zelensky fired him, or tried to fire him. At first, Zelensky said no. And Sersky and the other generals backed Zelensky up. That's the end of civil-military, relationship. But Nuland knew that the next step would have been a coup. And we can't have a coup when we're talking about a democracy that we're defending at a time when Congress is debating $64 billion. So she flew in and she negotiated the settlement, which had Zelensky step aside. But Sersky, when he stepped in, he came in saying, we are the sole decision makers about the battlefield. And the proof of that is, right after he took over, he said, we're going over to the general defensive. The attack's over. And Zelensky didn't say a word about it. Not a word. Zelensky is out of the business of interfering with the front line. What's happening on the front line right now is purely a military issue. It's a desperate situation, but you see Sersky committing the reserves to the Orlovka battlefield, to Robotyno, to buy time to see if they can generate something, but they're not able to. And at some point in time, Zelensky is going to step over his red line because he was told to stay out of military decision making, and he's going to get involved and he's going to try and reassert himself. And when that happens, I think,
I think his coke binge will be over, shall we say? At any rate, one more thing. Speaking of debacles, now we're talking about the empire's debacles. Margaret Kimberly had a funny name for an article. State of the Union failed, right? And right now, under this crazy administration, we're in a failed state. Everything's crazy. They're trying to give $1 trillion now to money laundering. I just looked at the latest defense budget. It's like $900 billion, but that doesn't count the $95 billion that they're trying to get through for Taiwan, Ukraine. And meanwhile, people are like, we got a few problems here we might want to address. But here's my point. Debacle number 2. I'm looking at Israel's like, yeah, we're going to take Lebanon. I mean, they're like talking. We're going to take Lebanon. Hezbollah's gone. We're invading over here. We'll take them all, bring them all on at the same. And I'm thinking, yeah, you attack Lebanon and Hezbollah. Hey, you ain't bringing nobody else on. The state of the conflict with Israel. I argue they've lost. They've lost diplomatically. They've lost them for PR. That militarily, economically, their economy's done. It will never come back. Israel is. This is two conflicts. Make that three, but two major, unthinkably major conflicts that are ending in absolute horror, collapse, and debacle. The state of the Israeli. I'm not going to call it a conflict because they're attacking civilians. Go ahead.
Well, when Israel defines victory, and they have defined victory in very stark terms, and it's an Israeli definition, the total eradication of Hamas as a military organization and the total eradication of Hamas as a political entity, that Hamas must disappear off the face of the earth. That's the definition of victory. Hamas politically has never been stronger than
one other thing you got to add. They said they were going to push Hezbollah back. They added that later back to some river or something, like so many kilometers past their border. So they another unreachable goal.
Yeah, to push Hezbollah back to the Litani River to get them out of the thing. You just had, I think it was a Senate Intelligence Committee review that's classified, but of course in Washington D.C. nothing's classified. It was leaked, and they say that all his, they say Israel at best has eliminated 35% of Hamas's military capability. That there's fully 65% remaining, and Israel is not able to finish the job. That's the very we'll call it optimistic view from the United States, which, by the way, concluded Israel's lost the conflict. This is the United States. The Senate, supporters of Israel, have come out and said Israel's lost the conflict. They've done all this, and only 35% of it's right. Now you have Nasrallah come out, and Iran has come out as well, saying, because people are putting pressure on, when are you going to jump in and help Hamas? And I think it was the Iranians that came out and said, we asked that question, do you need us? And the Iranians came back and said that Hamas said, no, we got 90% of our capability still. We got lots of weapons, lots of stuff. We can do this forever. And so from the Iranian perspective, Hamas has suffered 10% casualties. From the American perspective, 35% casualties. I guess the truth is probably somewhere in between. But the bottom line is Israel has not come close to eradicating Hamas as a military organization. Hamas retains the ability to inflict horrific casualties on Israel. I think another thing is they've suffered 85 Merkava tank losses. The Israelis recently tried to do a mobilization of some 15,500 troops. They can't mobilize. Nobody wants to be mobilized now. Morale in the Israeli army is trashed. What they've had to do is replace the professional units with these yeshiva units, these reserve units that are brought from these very religious. This is why you see the atrocities that you see, because these are yeshiva units that are the whole deal, I guess, is that they study the Talmud. They're Talmudic scholars. They sign a 5-year commitment with the Israeli army. So while they're in the IDF, they're doing Talmudic scholars, and then they go do stuff. So these are people who were trained from the very beginning. These are the greater Israel people. They believe
Azov. It's Israel's Azov battalions.
It's perfect. Hey, Garland, remember you talk about stealing things? I'm stealing that.
Feel free, with permission, so there's no copyright violation here.
But you're 100% correct. This is the Israeli equivalent of the Azov. These are the Israeli nationalists, the Zionists. So they believe in a greater Israel. And so these are the guys going in who are going through the lingerie, who are blowing up things, who are torturing people, and they just don't care because they feel empowered to do this. Those are the only people right now that are effectively operating inside Gaza, because the regular forces are just tired of it. They're tired of it. They've gotten pounded. They understand the reality. And even these Azov people, they're not succeeding. They're able to rape women. They're able to murder children, to murder old men, to do things. But there's no military victory here. So militarily, Hamas is there. Russia just brought, Hamas delegations to Moscow together with the Palestinian Liberation Organization to create a governing entity that includes Hamas. It won't be called Hamas because Russia understands that politically you've got to change the title and you've got to dilute the presence. But it's a big victory if Russia can pull it off, to have Hamas and the Palestinian Liberation Organization coming together to agree to bury their differences, to come together as a single entity to govern a future Palestinian state. What that means is that Israel didn't defeat Hamas politically because they are part of a future government. So Israel has lost this war, 100% lost this war. They're not going to win this war. But now we come to other things. Northern Israel, the people have given up. They're leaving. They're fleeing. The economy of Israel is collapsing. And it will never recover. I just want everybody to understand that the Israeli economy will never recover. And the reason why is that the Israeli economy was gearing up to this great future where you would have the India Middle East economic corridor connecting, India, Asia, through the Middle East, including Israel, through the port of Haifa, to Europe, and that Israel would be the centerpiece of this, the linchpin holding it all together. I mean, it was so great that even Benjamin Netanyahu, when he spoke to the General Assembly in September, instead of showing the Iranian bomb, he held up the map and said, look how great Israel is going to be. This is the future of Israel. That future will never happen. It's over. The world is abandoning Israel as we speak. The Israelis are so stupid, because, look, the mainstream Arab nations, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, etc., they've never been on the side of the Palestinian people, ever. And their governments have been able to, insulate themselves by talking about the need for economic stability and all this kind of stuff, Israel, da-da-da. But the Arab street has never abandoned the Palestinian cause. And now here we are, Ramadan, and the Israelis are doing stupid things, like attacking Rafah, allowing airdrops to come. Did you see that? They allowed the airdrop to come in, and then when the Palestinians came, they hit it with a bomb and they killed everybody. I mean, the Israelis are literally mass murderous, genocidal idiots. And now the Arab nations didn't push to get this thing resolved before Ramadan. The street is up in arms right now about this. Israel has been abandoned by the world. So Israel not only has failed to achieve its objectives, it's in a position where it's put its existential future at risk. It can't go to war with Hezbollah. Hezbollah, do you see any panic on the part of Hezbollah?
No.
None whatsoever. They're just like, even Nasrallah said, look, you've martyred our people. When you martyr them, we put their photographs up here. We honor them. We bury them. We praise them. We don't deny it. We've lost a lot of people. We don't deny it, but we admit our losses. You don't admit anything. And the Israeli army is demoralized. I don't know what they think they're going to invade Lebanon with. There's not a single Israeli force right now that's saying, let's go do this, guys. I've been with Marines, on the eve of war, and they are bloodthirsty guys. I mean, I hate to smile about it, but I'm just saying that, let's talk about boxing. Go into the locker room before a fight. The boxer that's,
oh, you got to pump yourself up mentally. Yeah, come on, let's go. They're shadow boxing, they're ducking and dodging. Oh, and when they get in the ring, they're sweating. They're not just sweating from the exercise, and mentally, it's drive. You got to drive, into your opponent.
Yep, they're ready. But the boxer's in there weeping, and he ain't going to win the fight.
Unless they come and say, hey, we got bad news. The guy that you were supposed to fight, he didn't make it today. Oh, well, who am I fighting? Mike Tyson showed up. All of a sudden, that sweat's going to turn into a cold sweat because you understand that you ain't going to be in that ring long.
I'm going to be tripping on my way to the fight. Oh, hold a knee. But Israel, there's no one in Israel right now other than the idiot politicians who are desperate for their political relevancy saying, we're going to go do this. They know the fact that Hezbollah is ready for this fight, and Hezbollah will kick the living crap out of them. And Hezbollah, it's not going to be a Hamas fight where Hezbollah's job is just to duck and cover and survive the round. This is going to be Hezbollah's going to win the fight in the first round, kind of thing. Hezbollah's ready for this. They have a plan for this. Israel doesn't have a plan. Israel's exhausted. The nation exhausted. To go to war, like the kind of war that you would have to fight against Hezbollah, you need the entire nation behind you. Israel is a fundamentally divided state right now. The people of northern Israel, for whom the Israeli army would ostensibly be defending, they don't want any more war. They're done with this. They've been getting shelled on a regular basis. They are shell shocked. They are bankrupt. They have no functioning economy. They're unemployed, unemployable. They're going to be leaving Israel, and that's the future of Israel right there. You're going to see depopulation over the course of the next decade. That's going to take Israel from 6 to 7 million down to 2 or 3 million, and that's it. And then that's the end of Israel.
The last part, again, Joe Biden's State of the Union address. The situation. Let's say they attack Hezbollah in Lebanon, and they get the bloodiest of bloody nose. Look at the position they put Joe Biden in. Because now Joe Biden has to say, we're going to come in and we're going to bail Israel out with Hezbollah. Well, Hezbollah, let me show you something real quick. Share screen. Who didn't see this coming? There we go. Yemen's Ansar Allah test fired hypersonic missiles military. Now, here's what I'll say. I don't know how true that is. That supposedly Iran has hypersonic missiles. Perhaps they've got military partners that may have shared some technology with them. Perhaps Yemen the same. But I think they're sending messages here to say this is going to be problematic. And if Yemen has them, then for sure Hezbollah has them. And even if they don't have hypersonic missiles, they got the Onyx. You're familiar with the Onyx missiles. They've got some very, very dangerous. You fire a salvo of Onyx missiles at a ship, that ship's in deep and serious. Not a missile. You fire a salvo of those missiles, that ship's in deep and serious trouble. It appears that Ansar Allah, due to their success, is being armed to the friggin' teeth. Somebody, who knows who, has decided that their allies in the Middle East should be armed to the teeth in a way that I think is to prevent further conflict. You know what I mean? It's like the guy who opens his jacket, who doesn't want to fight and points to the gun. He's not saying I'm going to shoot you. He's saying, look, you could get this. You don't want this fight. It's going to get deadly real quick. Your thoughts on that particular turn of events and the position Joe Biden's in? If Israel says, help us out, we're getting beat up by Hezbollah, and you're looking at Hezbollah armed to the teeth, you could take a hit. And the people at home are in the freaking streets right now. How's Joe Biden going to get into a fight to defend Israel when the people here are ready to cut his head off? Anyway, make some sense of that, Scott Ritter.
Early on when Saudi Arabia first intervened against the Houthi in Yemen in 2014, the Houthi had limited capability. They had some Scud missiles, left over that they could fire. But suddenly we saw, over the course of a couple of years, we saw the Scud missiles being modified. And, the initial modifications were crude, but effective to increase the range. But then the modifications suddenly, again, got this, by orders of magnitude, qualitative improvements, guidance coming in, separating warheads and all this stuff. I'm somebody who tracked this with the Iraqis and watched how an indigenous nation, a sovereign nation with indigenous capabilities, with a tremendous amount of resources, the timelines that were associated with developing, testing, etc. And I'm seeing what's happening with the Houthi is this extraordinarily compressed timeline, which tells me that they're getting help. And what was happening is that the Iranians were sending in their guys who've already solved these problems, and they're giving the Yemenis the solution, saying the school solution is here. And by the way, here's some crates full of components that you can use to help upgrade it's a kit, an upgrade kit. And so you got, and sure enough, when you went through the debris, you'd find evidence of the upgrade kit, some electronics panels here, some chips here, some things there. But the missile itself, when you track the serial numbers, goes back to the basic Scud that was delivered to Yemen back in the 1980s. and then eventually you get the indigenous missile that the Yemenis went over to the indigenous. And now you have the same thing. These hypersonics are solid fuel based. So the Yemenis have a solid fuel infrastructure, which is impressive, by the way. It's the Iraqis struggled to get a viable solid fuel capability. And they had German designs. They had a lot of money. But the Yemeni now are producing. So what happened, I believe, with the so-called hypersonic is because it's a question of fuel and fuel design, engine design, things that you test normally that take a lot of time to develop. The Iranians came in with the formulas, with some of the ingredients and the recipe, and the Yemeni went, oh, and then the Iranians went, this is how you do it. And now you have a Yemeni hypersonic. It's Iranian technology. There's no doubt in my mind. And the Iranians are doing it for just the reason you said. They're saying, let's end this here. They're not stupid. They're like everybody else. You'd rather fight the battle there, away from your soil, than have it come to you. Iran is ready and prepared to do this, but why allow the situation with Yemen to deteriorate to the point that the West feels then comfortable now to bring the fight to Iran? Why not keep it there at Yemen? So they're giving them these capabilities that are going to be fundamentally game changing, because what happens when an American ship goes down? What does the president do then? Bomb more? You're already bombing them with everything you got. Bomb more? You're going to bring in another carrier battle group. Now, all the Iranians are going to do then is extend the range of this hypersonic missile. And then, pop, there goes a carrier. What are you going to do now, Joe Biden? Bring in another carrier battle group to bomb more, knowing that doesn't change anything? We don't have the ability to project 750,000 troops into the region anymore. The day of Desert Shield, Desert Storm, the day of Iraqi, Operation Iraqi Freedom is over. We can't do that anymore. We are overextended everywhere. So Biden needs to back the hell off. We have to bring it into this conflict, because to continue to push is going to put us in a mission impossible situation where all we are is humiliated, embarrassed. And then what? It comes down to, at the end of the day, the only thing we have left is to nuke them. And trust me, there's some idiots in Washington, D.C. who will say, all right, time to drop a nuke on Sana. We don't want to get to that direction. We need to understand that what's happening right now is not an existential problem for the United States. It could become one if we allow it to become one, but it isn't one right now. It's a problem for Israel that can be resolved simply by telling Israel to stop doing what they're doing. But no, the president, Joe knows it's the answer. I mean, he got, a come to Jesus conversation with Bibi. I mean, ironic to have a come to Jesus conversation with a Zionist Jew. But but anyways, but he didn't have that coming, because Bibi's telling him to pound sand. A come to Jesus one is where Bibi never speaks again.
Right.
That's a real come to Jesus. I could have if I were the president of the United States, I could have a come to Jesus talk with Bibi Netanyahu, and you would never hear Bibi Netanyahu say a word again, because there would be a whole bunch of Israelis around him with a pistol in his head saying, we don't want Ritter to do what Ritter just promised he was going to do. So we're not going to let you open your mouth. You're finished. You're done. Get out of here. That's the kind of control we have. The United States, I keep hearing people, well, Israel bought Congress. Yeah, I'm one of the guys say Israel bought Congress. Israel did this, Israel that. An executive right now, again, I could, as the chief executive, sign a national emergency law that declares AIPAC a foreign agent. And I would send U.S. Marshals in and arrest every member of AIPAC right now. Done. That's a dictatorship. Take it to court, pal. I mean, take it to court, see what flies. I'm declaring them. And you know what? Using existing laws and precedent that the court has acted on regarding Russia and everybody else, they all qualify. I would win that case hand down. I would terminate all assistance to. Congress doesn't get to bring an ambassador home. I do. I would call up the U.S. ambassador, say, you're coming home. Pack it all up, empty the thing out, put explosives in the building, blow it up. We ain't never coming back. We're done. Oh, the Israeli guys, you can go home, but we're going to arrest you and detain you anyways because we're at war with you now. I mean, there's things we can do. The president could do a whole bunch of things to Israel, and Israel can't do anything about it because they cease to exist as a nation without American support. But we don't go that route because we're scared, we're intimidated, we're owned. But this concept that America's powerless, and at some point in time, American interests are going to get to the point where we don't want to be humiliated by the Houthi, because that's going to happen. And we don't want to lose an aircraft carrier. We don't want to lose more ships.
Oh, we lost Scott there. We're not hearing you, Scott. No sound. Well, here's the bottom line. We are at the end of the show. I did that to let him know we're at the end of the show, everybody. Thanks a lot. Go to scottritter.com. That's scottritter.com. Excuse me, Scott Ritter Extra. Scott Ritter Extra. There we go. Scott Ritter's out. Go to Scott Ritter Extra for more information. We're at the end of the show anyway. That was the last few words, so something happened, but that's okay. It doesn't matter. Go to scottritterextra.com. Make sure you help Scott out. Make sure you check out all of his information, and of course, make sure you donate. We've got lots of things going across the bottom here. Follow me on Rockfin and Telegram. There's Patreon's an option. Buy me a coffee, PayPal. There's lots of ways to contribute to the channel. Whoever does that, I appreciate it. Don't forget, in the show notes, I have an article in which I talk about all of my content, all the content, Stephen Gardner, through the eyes of, you name it, all getting stolen. When you see these people who pop up now with these new videos, and they'll have like Scott or somebody or Doug McGregor, and in the background, they just stuck some video over it. Report that crap. Report it to YouTube. Report all of it to YouTube. This is stolen stuff. You've got a bunch of channels now who are doing nothing but stealing stuff from Ron Paul and Garland Nixon and Danny Haiphong, through the eyes of Anna over there, Daniel Davis, you name it. They're stealing all of this Scott Ritter stuff. When you see that stuff, go to the channel and report it to YouTube. Let's make sure every one of those channels get 3 strikes so we can shut them down. I've written an article. Look at it in the show notes. Share that article with everybody. It's on my Substack, and sign up for my Substack. Thanks a lot, everybody. By the way, I understand the Duran is on. You know, that's one of my favorite channels. If you're here, make sure you go over to the Duran and check them out. Make sure everybody hits the like button. I'm out.